Am I worth it? I can always end my own life. I'm an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and radio show personality. I'm not here to talk about any of that. This is about my struggle through troubling thoughts to become what I am now.
Hello, I'm Tom Fox. I didn't start off on the usual path. I've been a criminal, a high school dropout, a drug addict, poor, and troubled. I was 9 when I was introduced to drugs. I battled a variety of substances throughout my adolescence. The most challenging among them was PCP. Under its influence, I've been stabbed, shot at, and left for dead on a handful of occasions, smiling every bit of the way. While I was reveling in rebellion, I was descending into addiction. I grew erratic and withdrawn, ultimately alienating every positive influence in my life. Soon enough, I found myself abandoned and on the fast track to oblivion. I often found myself thinking, I don't deserve better, or I'm garbage. Who needs someone like me in their life? I latched onto these narratives because they were all I could allow myself to believe. Perhaps the most difficult part of my journey was overcoming these obstacles only to be confronted with one of the most debilitating challenges I've ever faced: depression. Although I still struggle with depression, life's become much more manageable by taking proactive steps to keep the darkness at bay. Today, I surround myself with positive people. I look for the good in every situation and strive to maintain a healthy lifestyle.
All different degrees of depression, under all circumstances, healthy lifestyle will have a role to play.
Using physical activity to sort of get yourself out of those dark places is great.
I would say most major universities have some sort of counseling and mental health service, or at least an entity that helps connect students with counseling and mental health services.
People call depression an illness, but I think in a lot of ways it's a reaction to really indignifying experiences in the world.
I worked hard to turn things around in my life. People in the community saw something inside me that I couldn't see myself. They helped me to think differently about my actions and encouraged me to continue on with my education. After graduating college at 40, I made a commitment to repay the kindness afforded to me by helping others. Even though I've turned things around, depression has remained on the forefront of my thoughts.
Life as an entrepreneur and philanthropist has its ups and downs. Deals go awry, and the charitable organizations I support face a multitude of challenges. Now, more than ever, I need to understand depression so I don't fall back into the comfort of suicidal thoughts. How does it happen? Does it vary in severity? What can we do to lessen its grip on us? To answer these questions and others, I'm going to speak with survivors and medical professionals who have dedicated their lives to help others overcome depression. Although I overcame addiction, I never fully understood why I was drawn to drugs in the first place. I was still surrounded by demons, and it wasn't long until I replaced PCP with alcohol. During the height of my drinking, I weighed more than 50 pounds more than I do now. Since I transitioned to a healthier lifestyle, I've not only lost those 50 pounds, but my self-confidence has increased and I have more energy.
Clearly, there is something powerful happening in my brain, as over time I've become happier. It felt strange. I lived through a lot of pain in my life, and I assumed that's just the way things were. Most days felt like they weren't worth living. I'm not alone. It's estimated that over 350 million people around the world suffer from depression, each of us with this amazing weight. Although I understand the loneliness of depression, I didn't understand what it was or how to identify it outside of feeling blue. I wanted to know how could I have caught the signs sooner. I begin my journey by planning a discussion with local mental health professionals. Surely they would have insights into the working of our mind. My thoughts trail to the exploits of my youth and the words of my grandfather. We are the product of our experiences. I lost my teenage developmental years to addiction. As I matured, I assumed my unhappiness was a byproduct of a difficult life. Never once did I imagine I was depressed. I thought I wore scars, and those scars ran deep.
Since I had challenges dating back to my adolescence, I first met with Dr. Gaurav Chawla from the Providence Behavioral Health Hospital, who specializes in youth mental health disorders, to find out the signs of depression.
The telltale signs, which would be mood changes. It could be in any direction, whether it is overwhelming sadness, crying spontaneously, feeling hopeless, or mood changes in terms of irritability, anger, anger outbursts, with disturbance in sleep, disturbance of appetite, which could be either excessive appetite or loss of appetite, concentration becomes impaired, loss of interest or decreased interests. A person who's interested in various hobbies no longer enjoys them anymore, doesn't like to hang out with peers, they stay in their room, they are not taking care of their hygiene, they're not organized anymore.
I also sought out the perspective of a professional psychologist and was introduced to Dr. Dean Zarvis, a forensic psychologist. Forensic psychologists handle criminal assessments and are often instrumental in determining an individual's mental state.
You'll have some sleep disturbance, but it won't be as drastic as what happens with a major depression, where you're up all night, you're waking up a lot, and then you sleep into the early afternoon, you can't wake up. You lose your appetite, you have no interest in food, so you're losing weight. You have what's called an anhedonic response. Nothing's pleasurable to you. You don't want to be around people, nothing. Sex isn't interesting, nothing. And, you're just sinking lower and lower. That's a major depression. The less acute version has little elements of that, but not as severe. You're not suicidal. You don't become psychotic, paranoid, which you can become with major depression. And you kind of get through life. You go to work, but everything feels blah. And you're not happy, you're not satisfied. And you know something's wrong, but you don't know what it is. Because I'm not sad, actually I feel agitated, I feel irritable. That's not depression, but it is. Depression is not just melancholia or sadness. It has these other mood components to it.
Arguably, many of these symptoms sound a lot like my struggles with addiction. So I went back to Providence Behavioral Health Hospital and visited Dr. Robert Roos, a specialist in recovery services, for clarification.
The hallmark of depression and diagnosing depression is somebody who has a depressed mood or a lack of interest in activities for a sustained period of time, along with some other symptoms that can include things like guilt and appetite changes and sleep changes. Some of those same symptoms are very common for people that are either using substances or recovering from the use of substances. And so we find in my work treating patients with addiction that there is a lot of commonality. There's a lot of overlap between depression and addiction.
It's becoming apparent to me that I suffered from depression for far longer than I imagined. I still have questions. What exactly is depression? For me, it was a living nightmare with suicide representing the only promise of salvation. But I can't imagine everyone is affected as severely as I was. How do we define the varying depressive states and get people the help they need? To learn more, I went to a family counseling center to talk to someone that knows depression. There I met with Karen Moser, who walked me through the different types of depression.
Well, there are really a few different kinds. We have what's called the DSM-5, which is kind of a cookbook of different diagnoses. People might have to have a certain number of symptoms in order to meet a diagnosis. So, when you look at it in a formal way like that, there is a diagnosis of major depression, which is usually a more acute level of depression that can be for 2 weeks or more. There's also pervasive depressive disorder, which is something that is seen to be a little bit more of a mild depression over an extended period of time, something like 2 years or more. I think we also find a situational depression, which is not a formal diagnosis, but something that might be brought on by some event that saddens somebody. And I guess the most obvious example of that is grief, that we see depression with people who are grieving that seem to be a very natural response to that event. Sometimes lasts a shorter amount of time, sometimes lasts a longer amount of time. There's overlap in all of these diagnoses, but I think when you're just treating somebody who presents with the symptoms, sometimes it's better to look past those kinds of labels and names and numbers and really try to treat the symptoms that the person's experiencing so that you can get them to feel better.
Back when I was at Providence Behavioral Health Hospital, I ran into Susan Plant, a proponent for using physical activity to manage depression. She shared her insights as well.
There's major depressive disorder, which by itself encompasses all of the signs and symptoms of depression. There's bipolar depression, where a patient may have manic symptoms but may be in the depressive cycle of their illness. Postpartum depression, I see that a lot. Drug-induced depression, maybe drugs and alcohol, or it might be something as simple as a heart medication that you're taking causing you to have depressive symptoms. See a lot of that. See a lot of medical issues, such as you're hypothyroid and you don't know it, and you're not on medication for that. That can cause depression, so we have to rule out all those things. And there's a lot of adjustment disorders with depressed mood. They don't meet the full criteria for major depression, but people can be suicidal and very depressed, and it's in reaction to an incident or a chain of events or certain circumstances in their lives that is causing the depressive symptoms.
Dr. Chavla concurred.
When we use this word colloquially, depression, it's a very broad term. But when we speak about clinical depression, it's one subcategory. And within that, there could be different severities. Depending on life stage, stressors, there could be different ways to understand those episodes of depression. So there are technical terms like adjustment disorder or postpartum depression, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and dysthymic disorder, which is a long, low-grade, long-duration depression. And the major depression, which is when you have a certain number of symptoms, sleep, appetite, concentration, your energy level, motivation, interests, all of those are affected in addition to your mood being disturbed and possibly even suicidal thoughts.
So far, we've learned a lot about what I should have looked out for. I'm beginning to understand depression from a clinical perspective, but I wanted to meet others who battle this menace, especially those who struggle with thoughts of suicide. I connected with a group of people who have overcome their challenges and now work to help others at the Western Massachusetts Recovery Learning Center.
I lived in a really small Indiana town. I was really weird. And sometimes thinking, I could end this if I wanted to. That's what helped me rest. I think there's so many of us that have seen things that are incredibly painful, have had experiences that many people wouldn't survive. So I think it's normal that sometimes we have those thoughts.
I was very involved in lots of team sports as like an adolescent. I was really encouraged to, be part of the honor roll and be part of school plays and kind of build a young person resume or something. It was that was the culture. And when I was 12 or 13, I started having all these suicidal thoughts, and I was getting depressed is what I would call it then. And yet I was involved in all these things that were supposed to be giving me so much life and meaning. So it didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to my parents why I was having these experiences. And so rightfully so, they were afraid, they were scared. I went to see a psychiatrist at the age of 12, and they didn't know what to make of it. Instead of maybe asking me what's going on in your life, what's stressful, and I might have said sir, I'm having a lot of trouble feeling like I'm not straight, I might be gay. And instead of really asking that, they put me on a bunch of medication. And so that kind of started when I was 12 or 13, with many, many years of struggling with what is wrong with me instead of what's been happening to me.
what I came to understand was it was my body and my soul's way of telling me that things needed to change in my life. And part of that was, I've been through some trauma when I was younger. For a number of years, sexually molested by a Boy Scout leader that I was involved with, and I needed to deal with that and kind of work through that. And I did that mostly with a therapist, but I find that groups, like support groups, were really helpful for me.
I think what matters is what we do with that afterwards when we pick ourselves back up again. What have we found out about ourselves? One thing I like to say is sometimes when I have suicidal thoughts, it means that there's something in my life that should die. Maybe not myself, not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I know for me, I used drugs, and that was something that had to die. I needed to end my relationship with heroin, for instance, for me to go on and to have a life that was worth living. I needed some of my relationships to die. Some of the abusive relationships that I've been in needed to end. And sometimes those suicidal thoughts, that's what they could be indicating. There's a role, there's a relationship, there's a coping mechanism that's just gotta go. Or maybe there's a trauma from my past that I really need to take a look at, to talk to someone, to heal from.
Caroline, Sean, and Chris are survivors. They've overcome adversity to help others. But even though there are people there to help us, sometimes it's difficult to ask for assistance because of the stigma associated with depression. When I finally realized I was suffering from depression, I didn't know how to reach out for help. I had a good career, was featured in news interviews, and traveled the country as a speaker. I didn't want to jeopardize my future by letting people know just how dark my internal dialogue had become. How could I tell anyone I went to bed at night praying to die? At the time, I had recently opened up about my past struggles with addiction and was concerned how people would view me if they knew I suffered from depression. Unfortunately, the stigma associated with depression forces many of us to brush aside assistance. But why do we feel like we should be ashamed?
I think as a society, we do not see emotional struggles in the same way as we see physical ailments. We have this hypothetical, arbitrary divide between brain and body, that we don't think of brain functions the same way as we do bodily functions. Emotions and emotional distress are based in a body organ called brain. But somehow there is a stigma attached to trying to seek help for that as opposed to a fractured femur.
Society is beginning to look at the condition differently. Stephen Marcus and his staff at West Central Family and Counseling, who've been working to change the image of depression and has seen a dramatic shift in public perception.
The beautiful thing, if we can say that there's anything beautiful about depression, is that people now can at least talk about it. It's something that is still a stigma, and we try to work on that every single day when we tell our folks that there's no difference between depression and cancer and Alzheimer's disease or cardiac disease. It's a true disease, and with proper treatment, we can make patients well.
I think nowadays there is more acceptance about the depression, but still the mental illness has some stigma surrounded. Compared to previous years, now it's more common to see people looking for treatment and talking about it, but it still can be some barriers for individuals to look for help.
We can only hope to continue that we do talk about mental health issues in this country a lot more than we ever did. It's in the news a lot lately because of, unfortunately, a lot of tragedy. And I think it has become a little bit more accepted to talk about your problems and to seek mental health treatment than it ever was before. So I think people who are of middle age and younger perhaps have a little bit of an easier time confessing, if you will, that they have a mental health problem and seeking some treatment for it. Having said all of that, I think we have a long way to go in really normalizing the various mental health problems, including depression, that many, many people in this country suffer from.
We don't have to be depressed. Sure, I still have bad days, but I've taken steps to keep my mind and body active. I maintain a robust social calendar and work out regularly, even when I don't want to. I understand maintaining a positive outlook is a process, and this process requires an investment of my time and attention. Depression can be managed. As individuals, how we go about managing depression will be different for each of us. Some people may require medication, others talk therapy, and for people like myself, we find benefit in physical activity.
When you give medication, we don't give happy pills. When we give medication for them to feel better, as they feel better, they can cope with things better. That's the goal of the treatment. When you get into depression, you change your neurotransmitters and you are able to function in a different way. That is called allostatic state. It means that you can still work in an unhealthy way, more than a homeostatic state, that you work in the way it should.
Now, we all don't need medication to manage depression. The science behind physical activity in the brain is very compelling, as Dr. Chawla shared.
It's a well-known fact about endorphins. That's not the only feel-good brain chemical. There are others too. Endorphin is just the best known. There are other neurochemicals, serotonin, etc., which are linked with physical activity, with diet rich in amino acids. And there are other dietary compounds like omega-3 fatty acids, which are subject of a lot of research. There are some studies that talk about complex carbohydrates, which can enhance the level of serotonin in your body. So there are several different, subtopics under the lifestyle choices that we could go into, which can be very helpful and have been shown scientifically to help at least mild to moderate depression.
His colleagues agree.
Exercise is a key to any sort of improvement in well-being, and exercise can be a factor in improving somebody's mood and improving their sense of well-being and their self-esteem. So I would always encourage every individual to have the appropriate amount of physical activity and exercise, whether you're struggling with depression or not. But particularly for patients struggling with depression or addiction, that sense of self-esteem, that physical activity can be potentially even more rewarding or beneficial.
You're releasing endorphins, which are going to help you feel less depressed. You're in better physical shape, so you'll feel better physically. And as a byproduct, if people are working out, they look better. Their self-esteem rises. Their appearance, maybe looks a little nicer, and that's a motivation to continue.
I stumbled upon using the gym to manage depression. I was diagnosed with nerve damage in my early 30s. My doctor recommended I use physical activity to lessen the strain on my nervous system. I started going to the gym slowly at first. Now I go at least 4 days a week and keep my workouts to 45 minutes. Not only do I get the benefit of physical activity, but it's an opportunity to gather my thoughts as I'm not distracted by the outside world. My workouts aren't intense. They're just enough to get my heart pumping and muscles moving. I incorporate free weights, calisthenics, and cardiovascular exercises. When lifting, I'm more concerned with proper form than how much weight is on my bar. Essentially, it's enough to challenge me, but not enough to feel a major strain. I also alternate between workouts, some days increasing my weight and lessening repetitions, while other days working in the reverse by lessening weights and increasing repetitions. I found this combination helps me feel the burn after each workout and avoid the monotony of a set routine. Jumping jacks, push-ups, and sit-ups are among my favorite calisthenic exercises. Nothing gets your adrenaline moving quicker than 100 jumping jacks to kick off your workout. I'm not as aggressive with my push-ups and sit-ups. Generally, I perform 5 sets with 10 repetitions each. Weather permitting, I ride the local bike path. This is one of my favorite exercises. There is no better way to wash away your worries than a day out in nature.
For me, riding my bike and going to the gym works. That solution won't fit everybody. You have to find the activities that work for you. There are many options for exercising, such as swimming, yoga, and tennis, for example. Even something as simple as going for regular walks will improve your quality of life.
It's something I associate very strongly with like working through suicidal thoughts and suicidal feelings. And it's also something I just enjoy on other occasions, but it can be a really indispensable tool to hear a lot of heavy thoughts and work through them.
When I started doing roller derby, and for many women I know that do sports, the focus stops being what your body looks like and what your body can do. And that can reframe your entire world. It can make you feel strong, and when I feel strong on the track, like in roller derby, I also feel strong in my outside world.
So exercise has been really helpful for me, and especially outdoors. I've tried going to gyms and stuff, and I don't enjoy it as much. I need to be out in the world. And so I love riding my bicycle, both road and mountain bike. Really, mountain biking is more my love, because I like to be out in the woods. So mountain biking, rock climbing, hiking, backpacking.
When I started doing this sport and hanging out with these other women, the women on my team, there were nurses, there were paralegals, there were moms. I started to think, hey, I can skate with these women. Why couldn't I do some of the things these women do? Why couldn't I move out of the group home? Why couldn't I have a professional career? And I think that strength really starts to translate into your life. When you're off the bike or you're off your skates, you start to feel strong in other areas.
Why are you alive still? Like, what are you doing on this planet? You're such a bad person. There's all these like hateful things that aren't true, but still seep into my thoughts a lot when I'm stressed out. And so yeah, it's reflective time, but it can also be like a really important moment of like pushing through pain.
After hearing these stories, I was convinced it couldn't be a coincidence that so many of us have come to use exercise as a way to manage depression. As a research enthusiast, I looked into studies describing the benefits of physical activity. Emerging brain research is shining a light on the benefits of exercise. For instance, a review by the Cochrane Library supports exercise's effectiveness in reducing symptoms of depression. In the magazine The Atlantic, I read about brain cells called neurons. The growth of these neurons is an important benefit of working out. Basically, the brain becomes optimized by exercise. Princeton's research delved deeper into the brain's anxiety regulation, showing even more promise for combating depression with physical activity by actually reorganizing and reducing the brain's response to stress.
So, we've learned some important things we can do to help avoid depression. I began to wonder if we should all be implementing these changes now, and how soon in our lives we should start doing so. That got me thinking about how today's young adults are managing depression.
Something that I've seen over the years is our college campuses are filled with young men and women who are suffering from great sense of anxiety and great sense of depression. And our counseling centers at these college and university campuses are beginning to get filled with people stepping up to the plate by saying something is wrong.
At least part of the crux of the matter is how chronic is this? I mean, all college students suffer with their self-concept because they're thrust into a new situation. They're being challenged in a way they weren't challenged in high school where they were the cream of the crop, and now everybody is the cream of the crop, so their self-esteem goes down the drain, and they have to pick it up again, and have to prove themselves, and on and on and on it goes, so there's a lot of stress.
To learn more about how counseling centers are helping students, I visited with Elizabeth Krakow, the Director of Counseling and Mental Health Services at the University of Connecticut.
You know, the first thing we do with people is, in any university would do this, is some form of triage. So we have a lot of students asking for our care, and we need to have a way to quickly identify those students who are in crisis. And so we ask them at first contact, if this is a crisis, please come in and see us today. Otherwise, we set up a phone triage and ask them about their mental health history, their current symptoms, etc. We would talk about all the different contextual factors that might be feeding into what they're experiencing, and try and make that connection. We may also recommend group therapy, which is very popular. It's a tough sell at first with students because they think, I don't want to say anything about my problems in front of other people. But what we know from having done group a number of years is that when another peer says to a student, I experienced that, or I took medication, or I felt stigma about this, it has a lot more weight than us, middle-aged people telling them that. So group therapy is really effective for this age group, and we find that students, once they jump over that hurdle and do it, really find it to be effective treatment.
As we conclude our journey, I'll leave you with another of my grandfather's sayings. If you don't like your life, change it. I may not have fully appreciated his comments until later on in life, but if you're suffering from depression, you have an opportunity to make a change right now. Despite living with depression, you can live a rich and meaningful life. We've heard from some amazing people who understand life holds more potential than adversity. They taught us that whether young or old, there are steps to manage our struggles. You can reach out for assistance by talking to a friend or family member. If you're in college, you can talk to someone at your university's mental health center. We've also learned that exercising stimulates our brains, increases confidence, and provides us with a healthy alternative for coping with negative feelings. Sure, you'll encounter struggles along the way, and there'll be days that will test you. However, by seeking assistance for depression and living a healthy lifestyle, you will create a support structure to get you through these challenges. Trust me, if I can do it, so can you.
And for anyone who may have depression, who may have anxiety, who may be afraid to leave their home, there's organizations to help. There's good people that are out there, and great things can come forth when proper medication, talk therapy, and group work is used. We can beat this disease.